So many of us exist in a state of unconsciousness. We navigate through the world running on blind autopilot, carrying out automatic, habitual behaviors that don't serve us or reflect who we fundamentally are and what we deeply desire. That comes from How to Do the Work by Dr. Nicole LaPera. Daniel M. says this: routines exist because they are the best, most effective, and most efficient way to get things done. I'm Chad Brooks, and welcome to the latest episode of Productive Pastor. Rhythms are stronger than goals. What's up, y'all? Chad here, and welcome to the latest episode of Productive Pastor. In this episode, we're going to dig into the idea of rhythms, why I think they're stronger than goals, and have some big-time conversation about what it means to actually see change in life, to find healthy patterns, to talk about preferred future thinking, one of my favorite subjects, and to start making new things happen. And what does it take to discern all of this? The subtitle of this season is 11 Strategies Against Time-Bound Resistance, and I am stoked to share this with you today. And all of this is a result of the last few years of the journey I've been on from being a workaholic to someone who is more mindful of my health and how my vocational life is affected. And I'm not here as a productivity expert, but just another pastor alongside of you in this journey. We've hit up a few things already in this season. We've talked about personal awareness and what does it mean to see our own time as both an indicator and a tool. And if you want some super actionable steps with this episode and with all of the episodes, I've put together a premium workbook absolutely filled with worksheets, questions, video lessons, all sorts of fun things. You can grab it at the show notes at revchadbrooks.com/PPP003, as well as other resources, some of the articles, the books I talk about in this episode, links, and also don't forget about the Productive Pastor community on Facebook, so come join the productivity party with 900 other ministry leaders. So let's jump into this episode, why rhythms are stronger than goals. So what are we going to do in this episode? A lot of it just is scaffolded off of what we talked about in our last episode about the power of a time audit. So let me ask you this question. What has to be going on in order for you to be at your best? If you've done the time audit, if you've taken the time to reflect on your own energizers, those things that bring you life and give you life, you've taken time to reflect on your rest a little bit, I'll ask that question again. What has to be going on in order for you to be at your best? Now, if you've not done this, I had a free tool in that episode for you. You can go and grab it. But this is where we are right now. We have to have a little bit of an honesty conversation before we jump into this. This is some of the biggest feedback I get from you over the years of doing Productive Pastor. At this point in time, you might have the ability to have an extreme amount of leverage over your schedule. I do. Or you might not have that much leverage at all. You might have young kids around the house. You might be serving a church that really doesn't understand why you're thinking about these things or is not supportive. You might be serving as a caregiver to a family member or another loved one. I want to make sure before we jump into this conversation that I recognize, and we all need to recognize, that each of us are in different spaces. And we don't need to productivity or rest shame anyone else. This is all about us discerning where we are and what we can do. So the main side of this, why rhythms are stronger than goals. And I have to be honest with you, I'm actually going to talk positively about goals, but it's the language and the idea behind it that I want us to reframe today. This is why. Goals have always been a struggle for me. I'm not the type of person that's necessarily motivated by them. Let me give you an example. I'm a big guy, and years ago, I decided to buy into this diet plan and coaching program, and I got into it, and I started seeing results. That was the worst thing for me because I am motivated by results. I'm kind of competitive, and I was told that a month in, that nobody had lost more weight than I'd lost more weight than anybody else ever had in the first 30 days of this program. So that led me to learn how to manipulate the system, how to do things that figure out what my body responded to the most, et cetera, that sort of thing. And I ended up losing 90 pounds in about 4.5 months. And I was the most svelte I have been in my adult life. But within 2 years, it all came back. Now, we can set goals, but unless we learn how to slowly change who we are, we're going to end up in the same spot over and over again. James Clear says that your outcomes are a lagging measure of your habits. James Clear has done the most inside of this whole productivity ecosystem over the last few years with his book, Atomic Habits. And I'm not going to be super actionable in some ways that some of you might want, because I'm just going to tell you, go read Atomic Habits. James Clear literally wrote the book on much of what we're talking about today. But we come back. If we continue to struggle with work-related frustrations, especially those that do surround the larger idea of productivity, sooner or later, we're going to need to come back and look at what ecosystem have we allowed our lives to be part of? And that's the place for us to think about. What ecosystem are we currently existing in? And is that ecosystem one of disorder or order? We talked about that in the last episode. But James Clear says this: your behaviors are usually a reflection of your identity. What you do is an indication of the type of person that you believe that you are, either consciously or non-consciously. Research has shown that once a person believes in a particular aspect of their identity, they are more likely to act in alignment with that belief. I mean, James Clear just throws it down. Daniel M. wrote a great book about discipleship called No Silver Bullets, and I read it last summer. And I would recommend it to anyone in church leadership who's wanting to think about discipleship. But what Daniel also did in this is he did a beautiful job explaining the idea of input versus output goals. And it lines up with this whole idea of rhythms and habits. Well, essentially what Daniel M. talked about was that we begin to discern specific behaviors and examples that ultimately lead us to a hoped for outcome, what we would previously call the goal. But I think that rather than just us thinking about certain tasks as goals specific, there's much more power in us understanding the agency we have over the ecosystems that we live in. There's this question I've learned a lot about and a lot through over the last few years, and it's this: what would have to be true? It's an appreciative question. It's one that allows us to just begin to go off in all sorts of fun places, but what would have to be true? It's a question that makes us reflect. Another question I really like a lot is this: what do I look like at my best? And I think about that one a lot, or ask myself variations of it before I step into things. But where it is the most powerful now really is me understanding that I can intentionally design rhythms in my life to not live in spaces of falsehood and instead to live in spaces of truthfulness. So I'm aware of who I am. I'm aware of when I work, how I work, what work looks like, what healthy work looks like, what unhealthy work looks like. What does it mean when I'm in some liminal space between healthy and unhealthy? All the things right there. But I think that this is one of those things where we can begin thinking so much about terms of agency. Because I've realized myself that when things are outside of my control, it's really destructive and it's unfair to allow them to reign over my mind and my decision making. And I talked about control and agency a lot in the last episode already. But this is really hard for me. Like yesterday, I had an unholy moment waiting for a representative after an hour and a half on the phone, and I realized after it, I was like, okay, I reacted in a way because I felt like I was completely out of control in this situation, and I was also not in the space to be spending an hour and a half on the phone. So I've learned so much about this, because the more we can learn about how to let things go, the better of a leader and person we are, because if we always live in this space of disorder and not taking care and control of things, is going to really just bear down on our psyche. And one of the ways that I've found to be at my best is to think of a handful of things that I know lead me forward, but also set me up to be at my best. And when we are in our best spaces, it's much easier to make good decisions and to move things forward. And if anything, agency is our own recognition of the actions that we need to take to move ourselves out of a place of disorder and into reordering. And one of the tough things about ministry is this, that we, in a sense, are asked to provide control over what's uncontrollable. And if we struggle with this in an internal way in our own person, it's going to be really, really difficult in our public leadership. So we need to think about this internally at first. Now, you might be thinking, Chad, okay, this is about rhythms and goals and that sort of thing, and you've been talking about control and agency for the last few minutes. Where do these two things come together, man? This doesn't sound like a goals episode. It's because of this. We have to learn how to create them. We have to learn how to discern and create rhythms for a specific purpose. And what does it mean for us to put small, tangible, dare I say, controllable things and our habits that lead us towards what is called a preferred future? Now, this is a rather generic term about longer range vision and outcome, that any sort of thing that we have a vision for an area of our life or the organizations that we lead. And I'll be honest with you, it's a really businessy type understanding. But if we believe God gives us specific calls and perhaps ordains individuals in specific ways, and I totally think he does, then we can see and understand how our own decision making and our spiritual life is absolutely in cooperation with God. Now, we're obedient and we're listening, but we are also following. And when we begin to understand this preferred future, we get the chance to start imagining and dreaming and designing the sorts of waypoints that would have to be true in order for us to live this preferred future as our actual future. Our intentional or unintentional actions are the things that create this world that we live in, and we can begin working towards a healthier path by realizing the power of our habits, of our inputs, of our attentiveness, all of those things. And jumping into this really happens when we are able to sit down and ask ourselves those key questions we've talked about earlier. Number one, what do I look like at my best? And let's talk about this. What is a healthy idea of you? What are you doing? What are you spending your time with? How are you relating to your family? How are you relating to the Lord in your own spiritual life? How are you relating to leadership? All of these range of people. What does it look like in your mind mentally? Like, how are you at peace in that way? Think about this. What if you go back and look over the last few weeks and say, wow, that was a really good day for me, and just begin jotting down some bullets on, okay, what made that a good day for me? What was going on there and that sort of a space? And so once you have this idea of this good day, and here's the thing, you're going to have a space of life that you know needs some work, that you know is maybe particularly exhausting, or it might be a fun space like, hey, you know what, we've got a growing area in our ministry, and I feel the need to spend some particular attention to this right now. Now, what does it look like to be at your best? And so you've got this idea, and what you've just built out in your head is a vision of the preferred future. It's that simple. And we're going to talk about preferred future thinking for the entire season, so don't worry. We're going to keep coming back to this idea. And then the second thing is this, and this is where we begin building up these rhythms and habits. What would have to be true? And that's my magic question. That is if we're using an appreciative framework, that is absolutely a design question right there. What would have to be true? I actually did an entire live stream on the practical side of this question. The link is in the show notes. You can go back and watch and see how I've used that question a lot. But this is it. What would have to be true? And when we know what would have to be true, is like, okay, this is how I can create some environment around there. These are the things I need to be aware of, like what time of day this happens at, and if it's a certain time of day, I might need to try to wake up a little bit earlier or something like that. What would have to be true? And when we list out all of those things on what would have to be true, then just begin looking at them and saying, okay, what are the ones I have control over and what are the ones I don't have control over? And here's the thing, if you don't have control over it, you don't have control over it. Like, put it aside. Don't spend your time focusing. Don't waste mental energy. Don't waste anything like that. Just stick that aside and begin learning what is it like to just pour yourself into these spaces that you do have a say in. Now, there's going to be some middle area. I know a lot of the listeners are younger, actually younger than me. I'm kind of an old man of this community now. But you got little kids, you got the little people running around the house, that sort of thing. I get that. You might have some gray areas there. But just think about what are the things that I can intentionally interject into this. So here's an example, okay? And I've done this years ago, and I've recently begun to have to doing it again. But I have an intentional Sunday morning rhythm. Now, the problem, well, years ago, it was we were growing like crazy, and I was getting diverted on Sunday morning before church actually started, and it was just throwing my mind off. And now it's never space. I'll be 100% honest with you. I've been super anxious and nervous on Sunday mornings for the last year, ever since we came back from our last lockdown. For some reason, I'm not sure why. I've had panic attacks on Sunday morning before church, but all this, I know that for me, with my gift set, with what my church has asked me to do, with one of the ways I know I am, I want to be able to relate to people well on Sunday, and I want to be able to preach well on Sunday. And if I'm dealing with a lot of anxiousness before that happens, it's just going to be a train wreck. So this is what I do. I make sure I'm in my absolute best mental state when I roll into the church on Sunday morning. So I do some special things. I read a couple of chapters of Andrew Murray's book on prayer every Sunday morning. I look forward to that. I only let myself read that book on Sunday morning, and I love that book. I go get 2 strawberry sprinkled donuts and a sausage cheese kolache on my way to the office because those are some of my favorite foods, and I only get them on Sunday mornings. So it's kind of a little bit of a Sabbath treat as well. I get into the office early and I make a cup of really good coffee, and I'm lucky enough to be able to kind of hole up in my office for an hour or so before I need to be in front of people. And I read deeply. I have time of prayer. I do my favorite spiritual things and office things in that space because I have the time to. And so what I've done in those moments, and my Sunday morning rhythm is super, super simple, but I've created an environment because that preferred future in that space that I needed was to be in a great mental headspace to be able to roll with the punches of whatever problems I encountered when I walk into the sanctuary 45 minutes before church starts. It's about building that mental space up for me. So what parts of your life could use a new rhythm? And hear me, this isn't some sort of magic fairy dust that we can sprinkle on things, but it's about us learning how to shift the way we create our schedules, the way that we give attention to things, the way that we put intention on things. It's about us learning how to focus on what is really important and to discern those necessary input steps that have to be there. Y'all, like seriously, the No Silver Bullets book is beautiful for discipleship, but it's also beautiful for all these conversations. And for me, we kind of get more tangible, tactical stuff here, and we go wildly deep into this in the workbook, but there's 4 larger categories of life. I see there's a personal category, there's a spiritual category, there's a family category, and there's a vocational category. So this is what I encourage you to do. What are a couple of places that you know need attention? I don't want to say work, because this is also a very forward motion type of idea. What are a couple of places in your life that you know need attention? Maybe how has that been going? Have you been paying attention to it all? Are you aware of it? Whatever like that. Have you been focusing on input goals with no idea of an output goal? Or maybe you've been living in output land. You've said something that's out there that, hey, we're going to do this year, but you don't know how to take a step forward. Or maybe it is a place that things seem to be falling apart. You know, what is maybe a place in your own personal life or your family life you need to focus on? Like me, I need to drop in weight again, but I need to drop weight in a healthy way and in a permanent way. That's kind of one of my things I'm thinking about right now. Or it might be something at church that is like really, really awesome and tons of possibility and church members are behind it and you have to lead it. You know, I think that building in intentional rhythms based off of a preferred future is a great skill to learn. And here's the deal. We don't want to learn this skill when things are going nuts. The best time to start building this skill is before we need this skill. So ask yourself these questions. What do I look like when I'm at my best? Or what do I look like when I'm at my worst? What are 3 things around this issue that you have say over or you can direct? What are the places of agency that you have as a leader, whether in what are all these different 4 spheres of life that we're talking about? Think of that preferred future and then ask yourself the magic question: what would have to be true? So that's it. Episode 3, Rhythms Are Stronger Than Goals. If you found this helpful and you want to dig more and more and more into it, I'd encourage you to go grab the workbook. Y'all, it's like I said, if the podcast is the what and the why, the workbook is the how. There's a couple great worksheets that are part of that process. A couple of things just to be aware of to read if you want to pick up more about this. So Daniel M's book, No Silver Bullets. Beautiful. Great. I love it. Well, if you're looking for a discipleship book, it's a solid one to think about. Also, James Clear, Atomic Habits. Y'all, this is the book that has been changing so much of this way of thinking, not for me, but for the whole productivity community. People are crazy over it. There's links to both those books in the show notes. Also, a couple articles that are interesting that I found helpful to be. The first one is this. It's from Medium. And it's talk about don't organize your to-dos by project, order them by mental state. Y'all, this is just a tactic I've learned that's very helpful for me. And as you build up these rhythms and stuff, think about where are you? Like, you might have some stuff going on in your life or your ministry that you know you need to do, but this might not be the right time to do it. I encourage you just go pick that article up, read that. It's a quick 5-minute read. It's not a big deal at all. The next thing is this, and this is an article I'm linking to that's going deeper into preferred future thinking and what that is. I learned about this years ago from a ministry colleague, and at first I didn't think it was a real thing, but realized that preferred future thinking allows us to not just sit in the middle of our mess sometimes. It's also extremely important in vision and what does it mean to lead people, because that's what so much of this job is about. So that's there. Now, if you're not part of the Productive Pastor community yet, we've got a killer crew over on Facebook. I would encourage you to go and join that, be part of all sorts of fun conversations. But thanks so much for listening, for being part of this reboot of the Productive Pastor podcast. This truly is a thing and a place of my heart. Would love to hear back from you. You can email me directly at revchadbrooks@gmail.com. And I'll be back in the next episode where we're talking about resting and how it is stronger than crashing. See you then.